I stood there in the middle of a crowded party, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. But it wasn't from the music or the buzz of people around me. It was pure, raw anger, mixed with a humiliation so sharp it was like a knife twisting in my chest. Right in front of me stood my wife, Sarah, looking all too comfortable next to that smug prick, Marcus. He wasn't even trying to hide his disdain for me, as if he owned the place, as if he owned her. And then, with a grin that made my stomach turn, he leaned in and said to her, loud enough for me and anyone nearby to hear, "So, have you told your husband that you'll be spending the night with me?" For a moment, my mind went blank. It felt like someone had just pulled the ground out from under me, leaving me falling, grasping for something to hold on to. I looked at Sarah, desperate for any sign that this was some sick joke, some misunderstanding. But no, she just smirked, a cold, cruel smile that told me everything. And as if to drive the knife in deeper, she leaned closer to Marcus, making it clear where her loyalties lay. It was like she wanted me to feel every ounce of betrayal. Marcus turned to me, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction, and reached out to pat my shoulder, like I was some sad, pathetic fool. "Don't worry, pal," he said with a sneer. "For you, I've got a consolation prize, my secretary." The words dripped with mockery, each syllable a slap in the face. That was it. Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw in a satisfying crunch. He staggered, eyes wide with shock, before I followed up with a hard, swift strike to his arm. I heard a crack as he hit the floor, clutching his broken arm, his arrogant smirk wiped clean off his face. But even then, I looked up, hoping, stupidly, desperately, that this would shake something in Sarah. That she'd come to her senses, see what she was throwing away. But her expression was ice-cold, filled with nothing but disdain. She looked down at Marcus, more worried about him than the man she'd just betrayed. At that moment, I knew, this wasn't just an affair. This was the deepest kind of betrayal, one she didn't even care to hide. And as I stormed out of that party, leaving them both behind, one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. I drove home that night in silence, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel, rage boiling in my veins. I replayed the scene over and over, like a movie I couldn't turn off. Every word, every smug grin, every cold glance from Sarah burned into my memory. This was a woman I'd trusted, loved, shared my life with, and she had torn all of that apart in one night. And what haunted me most was that this betrayal hadn't happened in some dark corner, hidden away. No, she'd flaunted it, made a spectacle of humiliating me in front of everyone. The nerve of her, and of him. The moment I walked into our home, the silence hit me like a wall. This house, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt foreign. Cold. I threw my keys on the table, pacing the living room, fists clenched as I tried to process what had happened. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs? My mind raced through the last few months. The late nights, working at the office, the sudden need for space, the barely concealed texts that she dismissed with a quick excuse. I'd brushed it all off, given her the benefit of the doubt. Because that's what you do when you're married, right? You trust. You believe. But now, looking back, all the pieces fell into place with a cruel clarity. The clock ticked past midnight, and I knew she'd be coming home soon. The thought of facing her twisted my stomach, but I needed answers. I needed to know what kind of woman I'd been living with all these years. Around 1 a.m., I heard the front door creak open. Sarah stepped in, glancing around like she wasn't expecting me to be there. The moment our eyes met, her face shifted, not to guilt or regret, but to irritation, like I was the one inconveniencing her. "Oh, you're still up," she said, barely masking her annoyance. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, humorless laugh that felt foreign even to me. "Still up? Really, Sarah? After what just happened, that's all you have to say?" She rolled her eyes, tossing her bag onto the couch and crossing her arms. "Look, I don't want to do this right now. I'm tired. Can we save the drama for another day?" Her indifference hit me harder than any insult. There wasn't even a hint of remorse. I took a step closer, my voice cold and steady. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been sneaking around with him, laughing behind my back?" Sarah shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face as though this were just another petty argument. "Does it really matter? You're so boring, Tom. Always so predictable. It's like you don't even realize how suffocating you've become. Marcus, he makes me feel alive." I felt something shatter inside me at her words. The contempt in her voice was so sharp, so bitter, it was like I was finally seeing her for who she really was. This wasn't the woman I thought I married. This was someone who had been wearing a mask, hiding her disdain, her resentment. And now, she didn't even care to hide it. "Alive?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "So, this is what alive looks like to you? Lying, sneaking around, humiliating your husband in front of half the city?" She rolled her eyes again, clearly bored with my outrage. "Spare me the wounded husband act, Tom. Maybe if you weren't so oblivious, so dull, I wouldn't have had to find excitement elsewhere." In that moment, something shifted. My anger cooled, hardening into something sharper, more focused. I realized then that no amount of shouting or questioning would make her feel remorse. She wasn't going to give me any answers, any closure. She wasn't even going to pretend to care. Without another word, I turned and walked past her, heading for the bedroom. As I passed her, she scoffed, muttering something under her breath. But I didn't care anymore. If this was who she truly was, then I didn't need to waste another second on her. I locked myself in the bedroom that night, replaying every cutting word, every contemptuous glance she'd thrown my way. I knew I couldn't stay in this marriage, not with the image of her standing there with Marcus, her eyes cold and unfeeling. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I spent the rest of that sleepless night lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of Sarah's betrayal pressing down on me like a storm. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smug, cold expression, her dismissive words echoing in my head. She had torn apart our marriage, our life, and she didn't even care. In fact, she almost seemed to enjoy it. That was when a thought hit me, sharp and clear. She wanted to humiliate me? She wanted to play games? Fine. Two could play that game. But if she thought I'd just sit back and let her walk all over me, she had another thing coming. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore, this was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect, and making her realize that she'd crossed the wrong man. I'd never been the type to seek revenge, but this was different. This wasn't some petty payback, it was about showing her that I wasn't a pushover, that she couldn't just discard me like yesterday's news. I'd given her years of my life, my trust, my love, and she had spat on it all. Now, she'd have to face the consequences. The first step was getting everything in order. If she thought I'd go down quietly, she was sorely mistaken. I spent the early hours of the morning gathering every piece of evidence I could think of. Bank statements, credit card records, phone logs, anything that could paint a clear picture of her deceit. I knew I'd need proof, not just for my own satisfaction but for what I was planning next. She thought she was clever, hiding her tracks, but she had underestimated me. As dawn crept in, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was no longer a desperate attempt to understand or to fix what was broken. It was now a focused mission, a quiet resolve to reclaim what was mine and expose her for the person she truly was. I decided to confront her again that morning, but this time, there would be no shouting, no pleading. I'd let her dig her own grave, let her talk herself into a corner where the truth would finally come out. And then, I'd take everything I'd gathered and make sure she couldn't twist this situation to her advantage. Around 8 a.m., I heard her stirring in the kitchen, probably making coffee without a single thought of last night's events. I got up, put on a shirt, and headed downstairs, my expression calm but determined. She looked up as I entered, a faint smirk on her lips, like she'd won some twisted game. "Morning," she said nonchalantly, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just ripped our lives to shreds the night before. I sat down at the table across from her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "We need to talk." She rolled her eyes, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Are we really doing this again? I thought you'd get it by now, Tom. We're done. You're only making this harder on yourself." "Harder on myself?" I repeated, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "You really don't know me as well as you think, Sarah." She frowned, sensing a change in my tone, a shift in the power dynamic that she hadn't expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "It means that I know about the secret accounts, the extra money you've been hiding. It means I know about the weekends you said you were on business trips. And it means that I'm not the fool you think I am. You want this to be over? Fine. But it's going to be on my terms, not yours." Her face paled for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through her mask of arrogance. I could tell she hadn't expected me to fight back, to be anything other than the predictable, boring husband she thought she could discard. But now, she was realizing that she'd underestimated me. "You can't prove anything," she snapped, her tone suddenly defensive. "Oh, can't I?" I replied, pulling out a small folder I'd prepared earlier. "I've got everything I need right here, Sarah. Every lie, every secret you thought you could hide from me. And when I'm done, you'll be the one left out in the cold." For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. "What are you going to do? You're not going to ruin my life just because you're bitter." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Oh, I'm not bitter, Sarah. I'm simply done. Done being your fool, done being disrespected, and done letting you control the narrative. You wanted excitement, you wanted a thrill? Well, here it is. I'm going to make sure everyone sees who you really are." The color drained from her face as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had pushed me too far, and now there was no going back. She opened her mouth, probably to throw some last-minute insult, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it," I said coldly. "We're done talking. I'll see you in court." With that, I walked away, feeling the weight of her gaze burning into my back. This wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was in control now, and I wasn't about to let her tear me down any longer. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning, preparation, and quiet determination. I threw myself into every detail, crafting a plan that would ensure Sarah couldn't just walk away unscathed. If she wanted a thrill, she was about to get one, but not in the way she expected. First, I secured a lawyer, one of the best in town. I told him everything, laid out every painful detail, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. He listened without judgment, nodding with a sharp look in his eyes as he took notes. When I finished, he simply said, "We've got everything we need. She's going to regret crossing you." With my lawyer on board, I started setting up the next steps. I took leave from work, knowing I'd need all my time and energy focused on what lay ahead. This wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about making sure Sarah faced the consequences of her choices. The woman who thought she could walk all over me was about to find herself in the spotlight, stripped of her lies and her games. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one last move I needed to make to bring her world crashing down. Sarah had a reputation to uphold, she was respected in her field, known for her perfect life. If her colleagues, her friends, and even her family knew the truth, she'd lose that polished image she clung to so tightly. And I was more than ready to pull back the curtain. I decided to confront her one final time, but this time on my own terms. I invited a few close friends over, people who knew both of us well. These were the people Sarah always tried to impress, the ones she bragged to about her picture-perfect marriage. She'd never expect me to bring them into this, and that's exactly why I chose them. When the evening arrived, I was calm, collected, and ready. Sarah entered the house, surprised to see our friends gathered in the living room, sipping drinks and chatting. She looked at me, clearly confused, but I just smiled. "Welcome home, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation, with some witnesses. Her face paled, but she quickly forced a smile, trying to act as if everything was fine. "Oh, really? And what's this all about?" she asked, her voice laced with fake sweetness. I glanced around the room, meeting each person's gaze before speaking. "I've been wanting to share something with all of you, something I've recently learned. Sarah, would you like to explain where you were last Friday night?" She froze, her eyes darting between me and our friends. I was at a work function," she stammered, her voice a bit too quick, a bit too eager. "Funny," I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling to a series of texts and photos I'd compiled. "Because according to these, you were actually at a hotel with Marcus. You remember Marcus, don't you?" A murmur went through the room as I held up my phone for everyone to see. Sarah's face turned ashen, her mask of control slipping away as the truth laid bare before her friends. She tried to speak, but her words came out in broken stutters, her confidence shattered. "You were lying to me, to all of us," I continued, my voice steady. "Pretending to be the perfect wife, the devoted partner, all while sneaking around behind my back. And when I confronted you, you didn't even care. You didn't even try to hide it." One of our friends, Laura, looked at Sarah with a mix of shock and disappointment. "Is this true, Sarah? After everything you've told us?" Sarah glanced around the room, realizing that the web of lies she'd spun was unraveling in front of her. Her eyes locked onto mine, a mixture of anger and desperation flashing across her face. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed, her voice barely audible. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Do this to you? Sarah, you did this to yourself. You wanted freedom. You wanted excitement. Well, now you have it. And everyone knows the real you." With her reputation in shambles, Sarah's confidence crumbled. She stood there, silent and exposed, no longer the smug, arrogant woman who had flaunted her betrayal. She was just broken. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room was filled with stunned silence as everyone processed what had just happened. I looked around at my friends, the people who had once admired her, and I saw the understanding in their eyes. Laura put a hand on my shoulder, giving me a reassuring squeeze. "I'm so sorry, Tom. None of us had any idea. But you handled that with dignity. You deserve better." That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. I had taken back control, shown her that I wasn't some helpless victim to be pitted or trampled on. And as I watched the last of my friends leave, I realized that I had finally broken free from Sarah's hold. But my journey wasn't over. I still had to decide what life would look like now, what I wanted from the future. This was only one chapter closing, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to turn the page. The morning after that night, I woke up with a strange feeling of peace, something I hadn't felt since I discovered Sarah's betrayal. The house was quiet, and I finally felt like I could breathe without the weight of her lies pressing down on me. But I knew that this was only part of the journey. There was still the matter of divorce, of untangling our lives in a way that would leave no loose ends for her to manipulate. This time, I would make sure that she couldn't walk away with anything she didn't deserve. I called my lawyer as soon as his office opened. He answered, his voice calm but with a hint of enthusiasm. He was ready to go to war. I updated him on the confrontation from last night, letting him know that Sarah's reputation was already fraying at the edges, that her friends and colleagues knew what kind of person she truly was. He seemed pleased, even impressed. "That's a strong first step," he said. "She's lost support, and that will work in your favor." The next few days were a flurry of legal meetings, paperwork, and strategy sessions. My lawyer was a master at his craft, finding every loophole, every advantage, and using it to my benefit. He advised me to stay calm, to avoid any unnecessary confrontations with Sarah, and to let him handle the details. "We'll get you the justice you deserve," he assured me. And for the first time, I believed him. Sarah tried to reach out, of course. First, it was through angry, demanding texts, accusing me of ruining her life, of exposing her for no reason. She was furious, her messages dripping with bitterness. "How dare you humiliate me like that," one of her texts read. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" But I didn't respond. Not a single word. I knew that engaging with her would only give her more fuel, more chances to twist the narrative. She thrived on control, on manipulating people's emotions. But now, I was done playing her game. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message from her, I'd glance at it, shake my head, and leave it unanswered. She was powerless now, and she knew it. When the angry texts didn't work, she tried a different approach. The messages softened, laced with hints of regret and fake apologies. She'd talk about the good times we'd shared, about the life we'd built together, as if that could somehow erase the damage she'd done. She even tried calling me in the middle of the night, leaving voicemails with a sad, trembling voice, as though she was the victim in all of this. But I knew better. I knew that the only reason she was reaching out now was because she was afraid of what was coming. She could see the walls closing in, and she was grasping for any way out, any way to salvage what she could. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. My lawyer and I were already too far along in our strategy. There was no turning back. Finally, the day came for us to sit down and discuss the terms of the divorce. We met in a small, sterile conference room, with her lawyer seated across from mine, while Sarah and I sat at opposite ends of the table. She looked different, somehow. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, almost desperate expression. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity, but then I remembered everything she had done, every word she had thrown at me, every moment of betrayal she had inflicted on me without a shred of remorse. My lawyer opened the proceedings with a clear, firm voice, outlining the terms we were proposing. I had made it clear that I wanted a fair division of assets, no more, no less. I wasn't out to bankrupt her, but I wasn't about to let her walk away with everything, either. We had built this life together, and she didn't get to waltz off with the spoils after tearing it all down. Her lawyer tried to argue, to negotiate, to paint her as a victim who had made a mistake, but was still entitled to a comfortable life. But my lawyer shut that down quickly, pulling out the evidence we'd gathered, bank records, hotel receipts, text messages, everything that painted a clear picture of her deceit. Sarah sat there, her face turning red as each piece of evidence was laid out in front of her, each document a nail in the coffin of her self-crafted image. By the end of it, her lawyer looked defeated. Sarah herself was barely holding back tears, her facade cracking in front of everyone in the room. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, that her actions had real consequences, that she couldn't just lie and manipulate her way out of this. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. In the end, the terms were set. She would keep her car, a small portion of our savings, and a few personal belongings. The rest, the house, the majority of our assets, even some of the investments we'd made together, would be mine. My lawyer had secured everything we needed, ensuring that I would walk away with what I had rightfully earned, while she would leave with nothing but her regrets. As we left the room, Sarah caught up to me, grabbing my arm. Her face was a mixture of anger and desperation, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed, her eyes flashing with a hint of the arrogance that had once been her trademark. I looked at her, my expression calm. "I didn't do this to you, Sarah. You did this to yourself. You wanted freedom? Well, now you have it. Enjoy it." With that, I pulled my arm free and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and defeated. The weight of the past few months finally lifted from my shoulders, and I felt a sense of closure wash over me. This chapter was over. Sarah was out of my life, and I was free to start fresh, to rebuild without her shadow looming over me. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, I knew one thing for certain: I'd lost something precious, but I'd gained something even more valuable, my self-respect, my dignity, and a chance to live on my terms. With the divorce finalized and Sarah now a closed chapter in my life, I began the slow journey toward rebuilding myself. The house, once filled with memories of our life together, now felt empty, but in a liberating way. Every room, every object, every inch of space was a blank canvas, waiting for me to fill it with something new, something that was wholly mine. It felt like a rebirth, a chance to redefine who I was without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. For the first few weeks, I threw myself into organizing the house, rearranging furniture, replacing things that had once held sentimental value with fresh, new choices. I wanted nothing that would remind me of Sarah, nothing that would drag me back to those dark, painful months. Friends visited, helping me transform the place, making it feel less like a reminder of what had been lost and more like a place where I could build something better. One evening, about a month after the divorce was finalized, I was out at a bar with my friend, Dave. He'd been a rock for me through everything, always ready to remind me of my worth whenever I felt like the ground was slipping from under me. That night, as we laughed and reminisced over drinks, I realized just how far I'd come, that the anger, the hurt, and even the humiliation were finally starting to fade. Then, something unexpected happened. As I was heading back to our table from the bar, I noticed someone watching me from across the room. She was sitting alone, a quiet confidence in her posture, her gaze steady and direct. I recognized her. It was Laura, one of the friends who had witnessed Sarah's downfall during that final confrontation. We'd known each other for years, but I'd never seen her like this before. In the chaos of the divorce, I hadn't really registered her as anything other than a supportive friend. But now, as she smiled at me and waved me over, I felt a flicker of something new, something unfamiliar yet intriguing. I walked over, feeling a bit of nervousness I hadn't felt in years. "Hey, Laura," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Didn't expect to see you here." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to cut through the noise of the bar. "Neither did I. But I'm glad I did. You seem different. Happier." I shrugged, feeling a warmth rise in my chest. "It's been a journey," I admitted. "But I think I'm finally getting back to myself. Thanks, by the way, for being there, for everything." Laura's eyes softened, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other in silence. There was an understanding between us, a shared history of that chaotic night, of the truth laid bare and the aftermath that followed. It felt comforting, almost grounding, to be with someone who had seen me at my lowest and was now witnessing me on the path back up. We talked for hours that night. About life, about work, about the things we both wanted for the future. She didn't pry into my past with Sarah, she simply listened when I chose to share, giving me the space to be myself without judgment. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, laughing and sharing stories as if we'd been close friends for years. As the bar began to close, Laura reached over and placed a gentle hand on mine. "Tom, you know you deserve happiness, right? Real happiness, not just a bandage over the pain." Her words struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I'd been focused on healing, on getting revenge, on moving on from Sarah. I hadn't even considered the possibility of finding true happiness, of letting someone else into my life. But now, looking into Laura's warm, understanding eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope. I think I'm finally ready for that," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a genuine, heartwarming smile that seemed to erase the shadows of the past. "Good. Because you deserve it, Tom." We exchanged numbers that night, promising to keep in touch. But as I walked back to my car, I felt something shifting inside me. This wasn't just a casual connection. It was the beginning of something new, something I hadn't thought I was capable of feeling again. I felt lighter, almost as if a burden had finally been lifted. Over the next few weeks, Laura and I began to spend more time together. It was natural, unforced, like breathing. We'd go for coffee, watch movies, take long walks through the city, talking about everything and nothing. She brought a calm into my life that I hadn't realized I was missing, a sense of peace that began to fill the cracks left by betrayal. She never pushed me, never pressured me to rush into anything. Instead, she gave me space to heal, to rediscover parts of myself that I'd long buried. Slowly, my heart began to open, to trust again. And with Laura, it felt right. There was no pretense, no manipulation, no hidden motives. Just genuine care, laughter, and a steady, unspoken support that made me feel whole again. One night, as we sat on a park bench under a blanket of stars, Laura turned to me and said, "Tom, I don't know where this is going, and I'm okay with that. But just know that whatever happens, I'm here. No games, no lies." Her honesty struck me deeply, and in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let someone in fully. To move on not just from Sarah, but from the pain, the anger, and the mistrust that had once held me captive. And so, as I took her hand in mine, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. This was a new chapter, one that had nothing to do with revenge or regret. It was about rebuilding, about rediscovering who I was and who I could become. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt truly free. Free to love, free to trust, and free to finally live without the shadows of the past haunting me. The weeks turned into months, and my life began to feel normal again. No, not just normal, better. The kind of life I had only dreamed about during those dark days of betrayal. Laura became a constant presence, not just as a friend or a romantic interest, but as a partner in the truest sense of the word. She was there to laugh with me during the good moments and to sit quietly by my side when old wounds would resurface. With her, I didn't have to pretend, I could just be myself, scars and all. We spent time doing simple things, things that I had overlooked in my previous life. Movie nights in, cooking dinner together, weekend road trips to nowhere in particular. Each small moment helped me rebuild the parts of myself that had been shattered. And in those quiet, shared experiences, I found something more valuable than any revenge or vindication. I found peace. One evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, Laura leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder. "Tom," she said softly, "have you thought about what you want to do next? Not just with us, but with your life?" It was a question that had been at the back of my mind for a while. The divorce had forced me to confront so many things, including what I truly wanted for myself. Sarah's betrayal had robbed me of my confidence, my sense of purpose, but slowly, with Laura's encouragement, I had started to dream again. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I think I want to take a break from everything. From work, from this place. Just a fresh start somewhere. Maybe go traveling for a while. See parts of the world I've always wanted to but never took the time to explore. Laura's face lit up, her eyes shining with excitement. That sounds incredible. You deserve it. You've been through so much, Tom. Maybe this is your chance to rediscover yourself completely. Her support meant everything to me. In the past, Sarah had always scoffed at the idea of finding yourself, calling it a waste of time, an indulgence. But Laura saw things differently. She wanted me to be happy, not for her own gain or image, but simply because she cared. As the idea settled in my mind, I began to feel a surge of energy, of hope. The thought of leaving behind the city, the memories, and the shadows of my old life felt like a true rebirth. And as I sat there with Laura, I knew she would be by my side, cheering me on, whether I decided to leave for a month or a year. It wasn't about distance or time, it was about becoming whole. The next day, I spoke with my boss, explaining that I needed an extended leave. Surprisingly, he was incredibly supportive, offering me time and even resources if I needed them. It seemed that everyone around me, those who truly mattered, were rooting for my journey of healing. As the days passed, I planned my trip, a solo adventure with an open itinerary. I would start in Europe, then see where the road took me. The freedom felt exhilarating, a chance to let go of control and embrace the unknown. Laura and I had long talks about what this meant for our relationship, and she reassured me, time and time again, that she wasn't going anywhere. "This is your journey, Tom," she'd say. "I'll be here when you're ready to come back." Finally, the day of my departure arrived. Laura drove me to the airport, her hand tightly intertwined with mine during the entire drive. When we reached the terminal, she turned to me, her eyes soft but steady. "Promise me one thing," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Anything," I replied, holding her gaze. "Promise me you'll find what you're looking for. And when you do, you'll come back to me." I felt a lump in my throat, emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel for so long bubbling up. "I promise, Laura. You've been my rock through all of this. And I wouldn't be here without you. When I come back, it'll be to build a life we both deserve." We embraced, a quiet, powerful moment that held a promise of the future. I boarded the plane with a sense of purpose and freedom that I had never felt before. This wasn't about escaping or running away, it was about finding myself again, reclaiming the parts of me that had been buried under the pain and betrayal. Over the next few months, I traveled through ancient cities, climbed mountains, and sat by the shores of serene lakes. Each place brought a new lesson, a new understanding of who I was and who I wanted to be. I found peace in solitude, joy in exploration, and clarity in the quiet moments where I was alone with my thoughts. Slowly, I let go of the anger, the bitterness, the need for revenge. I began to see the betrayal as a chapter that had ended, not as the defining moment of my life. And as I shed those old wounds, I felt lighter, more open to the possibilities that lay ahead. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Laura. We spoke often, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. She was my anchor, my reminder of the life I wanted to build when I returned. She never asked me to hurry back, never pressured me, she just listened, encouraging me to keep growing, to keep discovering myself. When my journey finally came to an end, I was ready. Ready to return, ready to embrace the future with an open heart and a clear mind. The pain of the past was now just a memory, a lesson learned but no longer a burden I carried. And as I stepped off the plane, seeing Laura waiting for me with that same warm smile, I knew one thing for sure: my life was my own again, and I was finally free to live it the way I wanted. When I stepped out of the airport and saw Laura standing there, a wave of emotions surged through me: gratitude, relief, excitement, and something else, something deeper that I couldn't quite name. She was smiling, her eyes filled with warmth and patience, the kind that only someone who truly cares could offer. I felt my heart steady, the last remnants of pain and anger from my past fading into the background. In that moment, I knew, I was home, not just in a physical sense, but in a way that was profoundly emotional. We embraced, and it felt as if no time had passed, as if all the months of healing and growth had only brought us closer. "Welcome back," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with a joy that matched my own. We stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a sense of calm washing over me. On the drive back, she asked me about my travels, about the places I'd seen, the people I'd met, and the lessons I'd learned. I told her everything, the highs and lows, the moments of solitude that had given me clarity, the beauty of each city, each landscape that had left a mark on me. She listened intently, her hand resting gently on mine as if to say, I was with you every step of the way. That night, back at my place, we sat on the couch, talking until the early hours of the morning. It was different this time. There were no walls, no fears or lingering doubts, no traces of the shadows that had once haunted me. For the first time, I was completely open, my heart and soul bare, and she met me with the same vulnerability. At some point, as silence settled between us, she looked at me with a mixture of shyness and determination. Tom, she began, her voice steady but soft, I need you to know. I never expected any of this. But I also can't imagine my life without you now. I think, deep down, I've been waiting for you, for this, even when I didn't realize it. I reached out, taking her hands in mine. Laura, you saved me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You showed me that life could be more than the pain I was carrying. You gave me hope when I had none. And now, I want to give that back to you. I want us to build something real, something lasting. She smiled, and in her eyes, I saw a reflection of my own resolve. We were both ready to step into this new chapter, together, leaving the past behind as a memory, a lesson that had brought us to where we were now. In that moment, I realized that everything I had gone through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the journey of self-discovery, had led me to this. To her. Over the next few months, we took our time, letting our relationship grow naturally. We moved in together, merging our lives in a way that felt effortless, like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Our home became a sanctuary, filled with laughter, warmth, and shared dreams. Each day, I woke up feeling grateful, knowing that I had been given a second chance to experience love in its purest form. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the cozy hum of music in the background, I found myself looking at Laura with a sense of certainty I had never felt before. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Her eyes widened, a gasp escaping her lips as I got down on one knee. Laura, I began, my voice thick with emotion, you came into my life when I was broken, when I thought I'd never be able to trust or love again. You showed me kindness, patience, and a love that I never knew existed. I want to spend the rest of my life giving you the same. Will you marry me? Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded, her voice a choked whisper. Yes, Tom. 1,000 times yes. We embraced, laughter and tears mixing as we held each other, our future stretching out before us, bright and open. The shadows of the past had finally been laid to rest, replaced by the promise of a life built on trust, respect, and a love that had withstood trials neither of us could have foreseen. Our wedding was small and intimate, surrounded by close friends and family who had been with us through it all. Dave, my loyal friend, raised a toast, his words heartfelt as he spoke about the journey we had taken to reach this moment. To Tom and Laura, he said, lifting his glass. May your love be stronger than any storm, and may you always find peace and happiness in each other. As we danced under the soft glow of lights, Laura in my arms, I realized that this was the life I had always wanted, the life I had been searching for all along. She was my home, my heart, and the woman who had shown me that true love was possible, even after everything I'd been through. Looking back, I felt no bitterness, no anger toward Sarah or the painful chapter she represented. She had been a catalyst, a harsh lesson that had ultimately led me to a better place. And though I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, I was grateful for the journey it had set me on. It had given me strength, resilience, and, most importantly, the clarity to recognize real love when it found me. As the night wore on, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I felt a sense of closure, a peace that had been hard-won but was finally mine. Laura looked up at me, her eyes shining, and whispered, "Are you happy, Tom?" I smiled, pulling her close. More than I ever thought possible. And with that, we began our life together, a life built on trust, laughter, and the knowledge that we had both overcome our pasts to find something rare and beautiful. This was our new beginning, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it.